The South Asian community is not a monolith. As we've covered on this channel extensively, the South Asian diaspora is the most culturally and ethnically diverse in the world. From Indians, to the Nepalese, to Sri Lankans, to Punjabis, to Tamils, to Pakistanis, to even Indian Trump supporters. Hey, we're here to help bring our community together instead of further apart, no matter how far apart we actually are. Everyone has family members that they dislike, but we still gotta love them anyways. But just because we love them doesn't mean we can't talk shit. And who loves gossip more than Indian aunties? So let's do like the aunties and talk some shit. Today we're talking about our own community and some of the faults that lie within. Like when I lied within the last 5 seconds and said that Indian Trump supporters are part of the Indian diaspora. They are in the diaspora, of course, but because they're Indian, not because they're Trump supporters. So good news, actually, we get to rag on them all we want because it'll have nothing to do with their given identity, but rather their chosen identity. But don't worry if you are an Indian Trump supporter, because I could never be as vicious and as merciless as the Indian aunties themselves. In fact, I can hear them talking about me right now. There has been an uptick in support for Trump among Indian Americans from 22% saying they would vote for Trump in 2020 to 31% in 2024. All the while, Harris votes saw a drop from 68% to 60%. Today, I want to dive into these numbers because while it seems like the Democratic Party still holds a relatively significant lead with the Desi demographic, Indian Americans have become the most reliable demographic for Trump behind white and Hispanic voters. Now, this video is mainly going to cover Indian Americans rather than Indian support for Trump in India. One, because that's enough content for another video entirely, and also because I don't feel quite comfortable enough with Indian politics yet, and like I said, we have a big community, so if I say the wrong thing, I have the world's largest diaspora to answer to, and that's a lot of aunties. Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm Saji Sharma, and I'm scared. Because we're going to be diving into and discussing cracks within our community and tracing them all the way back to their origins. Saji, that sounds like really important work. Why would you be scared? It is really important work. Thank you for saying that. And I don't doubt that I'm the right man for the job, but I'm scared because usually on this channel, we'll look at some evil white man ignorantly slandering the entirety of Indian people, to which we can all come together in unity and laugh at the audacity of these white men. But today, I'm going to be criticizing people within our own community. And as we know, that isn't as one-sided. Yes, Trump is the eye candy of today's video, as he is with any room that he walks into. But we'll be using Trump as a tool to further analyze some systemic issues in our culture. Things like traditionalism, how to not support your community, materialism, gender roles, and much more that's likely to get me into some hot water. But let's start off at the beginning and take a closer look at the increase of support for Donald Trump. As I mentioned, there was a pretty significant uptick in Indian Republican voters this last election. However, there are interesting voter disparities that I want to pay attention to. The most notable being the striking gender gap in voting preferences. While 67% of South Asian women said that they would vote for Harris, among South Asian men, it was only 53%. Milan Vaishnav of the Carnegie Endowment stated, "I was really surprised by this gender gap in voting preferences because this is not something we've seen in the past. If we look back at the survey 4 years ago, we saw very little difference between men and women. Votes for the Democratic Party among Indian American men under the age of 40 dropped from 70% to 44%, while for the Republican Party, it increased from 23% to 48%, toppling the Democratic percentage. In 2024, the majority of young Indian American men said that they would vote for Donald Trump, a man that has vehemently voiced anti-immigration rhetoric. But it doesn't surprise me, and I'll tell you why. It's because of Drake. I'm kidding. Kind of. No, not really. I'm not kidding. We're gonna get to it. But before we do, we have to connect some dots and talk about the origins of Indian American culture. But before we do that, here's a quick word from our sponsor, Odoo. Odoo's back again. And if you haven't heard, they are one of the best options out there for making your own website. Trust me, I know how it feels to lack the technical skills needed to go through this seemingly complicated process. But with Odoo, that process becomes seemingly uncomplicated, as building a website only takes a few clicks and is completely free. They have an intuitive interface that makes creating and styling your website as easy as drag and drop. Building a modern website for all of your business needs has never been easier. I know you're not good with technology. You don't have to keep lying to yourself. Your first application with Odoo is free for life. You get a free custom domain for 1 whole year, as well as unlimited hosting and support. Don't fake it till you break it, and try Odoo's website builder for free today by clicking the link in the description. And thank you, Odoo, for sponsoring this video. Indian culture is very traditionalist and conservative in its threading. There is a prioritization of gender roles that supplements how we tend to value work, money, leisure. And what's interesting is, I think there are key differences in Indian conservatism and culture in America versus in India. Now, for all of my white viewers, when I say Indian conservatism, I don't mean Indian Republicans. We haven't gotten to that part of the video yet. I mean conservative in the sense of holding on to traditional values. Things like harsher disciplinary action, stricter rules, a higher expectation of respect, high value for religion. These are all things that still exist in India, but have remained a lot more prominent among Indian immigrants. And there's a reason for this. No, not Drake. We haven't gotten to that part of the video yet. It's something people call the time capsule effect, or the immigrant time warp mentality. That is essentially an effect specific to immigrants. Immigrants who tend to see their home country as how they left it, leaving them with the subconscious notion that it's sort of frozen in time. Anjali Balakrishna of the American India Foundation did a piece on an idea called the reverse Indian diaspora, in which Anjali, a first-generation immigrant in America herself, was seeking resolution to an introspective cultural conflict. So she decided to move to India in order to find some answers, where she met and interviewed Indians who were actually in similar situations. One interviewee described the effects this time warp mentality has on her and her family. The Indian culture that they grow up with was the culture that their parents or grandparents left, often 20 to 30 years ago. One interviewee shared that many of the traditions and customs that they honored in their Indian American home were so outdated that their relatives in India no longer followed them. And India has progressed, as all societies do with time. India is more diverse, and it's more modern in the way that people live and the way that people think. The time capsule version of India was shattered by the reality of India's growth and development over the past decades. Another reason for holding on to these static perceptions of India could have to do with immigrant parents feeling the need to preserve the culture, after facing the reality that their kids won't be exposed to it in the same way that they were. I was on Reddit the other day, huge shout out to the ABC Desi subreddit, and I saw an interesting discussion surrounding this topic. So as an immigrant who moved to the USA a couple of years ago, I feel a lot of Indians in the US are conservative, especially with their kid-related issues. One reason, which I feel is the main reason, is that there is an unspoken, unwritten burden to preserve the culture. The kid is going to be exposed to US culture outside, so I've seen a lot of immigrant parents doubling down on Indian culture at home and trying to put rules to stop US culture when the kid is outside. This becomes worse because other Indian immigrant parents also agree, and they get validation that they are doing the right thing. This preserving Indian culture leads them to be more conservative than their counterparts in India. I feel preserving Indian culture through language and traditions is right and should be done, but we also have to keep in mind that these traditions are not suppressive, and no matter what we want, the kid is growing up in the USA and not India. So there will be things that immigrant parents won't understand, and that doesn't mean they are wrong thing. Finding a balance between kids learning about the culture and not overburdening them is a tough situation that every immigrant parent faces. And I thought this was so well put. They're correct, this is not a suppressive culture, and immigrant parents are not in the wrong for feeling the need to preserve their culture. But oftentimes, that desire can clash with the culture that their children are growing up with. I mean, parents, I get it. I wouldn't want my kid to be a Drake fan either. I also totally agree with what they said about this behavior being validated by other Indian immigrant parents, because as we all know, Indian people move in herds. I mean, no wonder we're all so similar. Behaviors are probably perpetuated at 10 times the normal speed. You know, I think we need some DEI in our own culture. Sprinkle in some new minorities into the friend group. Hey, it could go a long way. Now, what does this have to do with Indians for Trump? And more importantly, Indians for Drake? Well, this Indian traditionalism and sort of time capsule effect plays a key role in how us immigrants and descendants of immigrants grow up and view things like success and money and parenting. And that has an effect on the type of artists we support or the politicians that we vote for. I talked about this a bit in my Vivek and Elon video, but this is a good place to expand on it. Vivek Ramaswamy is the poster child for Indian conservatism, as well as for Indians who are American conservative. This guy oozes conservative, from the way that he speaks to the way that he appeals to white people to the way that he unethically does business. The only thing about Vivek that isn't conservative is his hairline. That is not a diss to bald people, by the way. Love my baldies and baldies in progress. I just think if you're going to be this conservative, you should at least cover all your bases. Vivek is the perfect embodiment of an Indian that flew too close to the sun. The traditionalism and conservatism of Indian culture has literally turned him inside out and made him an inverse Indian. And this tweet is the perfect representation of the rigid and outdated thinking associated with this traditional culture. I went over this tweet in a recent video about Doge, which Vivek has since left, and I can only assume that his tweet criticizing American culture had something to do with that. Now, I'm not going to read the whole thing because I already did, but in this tweet, trying to defend the tech industry's use of higher skilled immigrants instead of investing in their own people, Vivek harshly critiques American culture as lazy and demotivating, saying that a culture that celebrates the prom queen over the math Olympiad champ or the jock over the valedictorian will not produce the best engineers. You can clearly tell he went to school for sociology. He then goes on to make a lot of TV and movie references to prove that bullying the nerd but worshiping the jocks in our culture is the reason that we don't produce a lot of American engineers. If we had more movies like Whiplash and fewer reruns of Friends, maybe Americans would be a lot more proficient. Did he see Whiplash, by the way? Does he even know what Whiplash is about? Does he think the movie was trying to glamorize education by way of manipulation and abuse? I think maybe it went over his head. But you know what? It takes an Indian parent to watch Whiplash and think, this is how we should be treating our children. More math tutoring, fewer sleepovers, more weekend science competitions, fewer Saturday morning cartoons, more books, less TV. I mean, this is what my parents would chant to me in unison every morning like a pair of evil twins. More math tutoring, fewer sleepovers, more weekend science competitions. So I just became a YouTuber out of spite. Just kidding. But it did sort of drive me in the opposite direction, obviously. Again, being the children of immigrants, there's conflict with your parents' culture and the culture that you were growing up with. Vivek just happens to be an Indian American that is trusting and perpetuating that same traditionalist thinking in a day and age where we've sort of moved on. This is kind of why a lot of Indian Americans like Vivek. As I mentioned in the beginning of the video, Indian Trump supporter is two identities, not one. Vivek is an Indian man before he is a Republican man. And when Indian Americans see someone like Vivek Ramaswamy, a lot of them only pay attention to the successful Indian man. To any immigrant, success is held to a very high standard. But for Indian immigrants in specific, the concept of success is sought after as if it was the fountain of youth. It's looked at like a goal that will be accomplished no matter the hardships, no matter the sleepless nights, no matter the sacrifice. Not only might immigrants feel burdened to carry on their culture, but they also risked a lot to be here. So that goal to strive for success is greatly pressured. And then if it's achieved, it's greatly commemorated. And that success to Indian immigrants is all-encompassing. Indians see Vivek's success and celebrate it. Not because he's a fellow Republican and he's finding success within politics, but because he's a fellow Indian and has found success, period. Unlike in India, where brown people are racist to brown people, in America, seeing another successful brown person is often admired or supported, which, is a good thing to do, inherently uplifting your own community. But I think this is a less supportive thing to do as a community than actually supporting someone who you agree with on a human level. When you hold success, at least the material idea of what success is, to such a high standard, your concept of material and of money begin to alter how you see the world. Making it becomes this success that is visualized as a tangible reality of wealth and glamour that, if is achieved, is flaunted to prove to ourselves and to other people that we did make it. Not that people can't or shouldn't flaunt the wealth that they've worked so hard to achieve, but there becomes this idealization and obsession over simply a perception of success. Success doesn't have to be monetary. What about inner success? Self-realization, self-fulfillment. These are all things I'd argue as being just as, if not more important than financial success. This strong resonance and relatability to the immigrant struggle, and therefore success, is often something that actually blinds Indian Americans from thinking in a distinct and impartial manner. We're ignoring our culture and actively hurting our own people by supporting someone like Vivek, who represents a party and supports a president that is baseline anti-immigration. I mean, there's more, but that should do it for you. So not only are younger generations not as interested in culture, but we're actively ignoring it by supporting people just because they're successful Indians. And it's all Drake's fault. I don't know why South Asian men love Drake so much. There's a very clear-cut connection that all young Desi men feel towards Drake, and I just don't understand it. I didn't grow up in what one would call a traditional Indian American household. Both of my parents moved from their respective countries at a very young age to Miami, Florida, an immigration hotspot where they experienced diversity and different cultures. This allowed them to assimilate very early on, modernizing their thinking and educating their social understanding more than a lot of my childhood Indian friends' parents. My dad is so Americanized that if you could only hear his voice, you would assume he's a white man. So because of this, I lack a lot of perspective on traditional immigrant parenting and home life. I'd see it because I had friends and went to their houses, and my parents still educated me on Indian culture and religion and history, but I was detached from a lot of that traditional culture. And a part of me wishes I grew up in that culture so I can understand more, like why South Asian men love Drake so much. That's actually the only reason. That's the only thing I care about, if I'm being honest. Sasha Ahmed, a 23-year-old law student living in London, has noticed something about the Desi guys she dates. It's really weird, she laughs, as she describes their short, faded haircuts and closely trimmed black beards. Some turn up to dates wearing athleisure, gold chains, and Air Force Ones. They think it's subtle, she says with a deep sigh, but it's obvious. They're trying to look like Drake. It's not just the aesthetic that's a giveaway. Ahmed has noticed the guys also try to live up to Drake's lyrics. Sometimes it's the way they act on dates, she says. There's this cocky kind of swagger, their attempt to use street language, even how they walk. Sometimes they try to be charming, but it comes across as really awkward, and they all seem to be mama's boys, or at least really dependent on their moms. Of course, how did I not realize it? Indian men are known to be mama's boys. And who's the biggest mama's boy on the planet? Drake. Drake is the mama's boy. How did I not see this sooner? It really doesn't make it any better for me, though. Listen, I get trying to fit in. That's assimilation. But if you're going to appropriate black culture, you can't be a Drake fan at the same time. I mean, that's hypocritical. You're disrespecting a culture by ignorantly indulging in it, and then out of all of the options, choosing a rapper that doesn't even care for the culture you're already disrespecting. That's like meta ignorance. Now, there are more things in common between Indians and Drake besides the soft spot for our mothers. The glamorization and over-obsessiveness with material, as well as male abuse of power associated with Drake's image, is applicable to the views of Indian immigrants, which is all unfortunately adjacent to the alt-right pipeline. And as we're all familiar by now, Trump hit hard with young men at the polls this past election, with 56% of young men in America voting Republican versus a much lesser 41% in 2020. A lot of this demographical victory can be attributed with the right's online presence. Sure, Drake isn't publicly right-wing, but he associates himself with people that are. If he was American, I'm 90% sure he'd endorse Trump. And these people he hangs out with are also associated with or are right-wing alpha male conspirators. People like Andrew Tate and Charlie Kirk and Sneeko and Fresh and Fit. Now, I'm using Drake to sort of thread the needle here, but this paints a clear possibility, in my own mind at least, of how young Indian men could have been swayed to vote for Donald Trump. Not necessarily because Drake will drop you into the alt-right pipeline, but because gender roles still play a big role in Indian American culture. Young Indian men are taught to be providers and are instilled with this vapid conceptualization of material and wealth as being the equivalency to what success is and what we should strive for. This is a quality of traditionalism that Indians share with conservative Americans, which can kind of connect the two. Trump, Vivek, and Drake are all men that use their power as men to take advantage of a system, of people, do anything they can to gain capital and to be successful. And that, in a way, is reminiscent of how willing and determined Indians are to achieve their success. Because at the end of the day, all Indians want is to take care of their family and future extensions of their family. I think we're just getting caught up in the concept of success that is taught to us, that entices us to work so hard. We place a lot of value on this success. Respect the people that can achieve it, and disrespect the people that seem like they don't want to. Trump is a wealthy businessman, and to a lot of young Indian men growing up in this culture, that is someone to idealize. Again, we're not a monolith, but if this does sound like you, your auntie's probably talking a lot of shit. Am I just an unbothered auntie now who talks shit? Except instead of friends, my outlet is YouTube? I don't mind that. I don't mind that at all. My name is Saji Sharma. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, make sure to like and subscribe. If you don't subscribe, I'm not your auntie. I'm only an auntie to those that subscribe. So if you've subscribed, you're very lucky to be in my hands. Gonna be treating you well. Watch. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.